You always said I was a better person than I knew I was.
Hey, folks, let's spend some time with friends up north. Pat Kreitlow of Up North News is on Lake Wissota. Sarah Yakub of the Minocqua Brewing Company Super PAC is on the Mississippi River. And up on Lake Minocqua is Kirk Bangstead of the Minocqua Brewing Company. Wherever you are, welcome. You're up north.
Won't you let me die?
Hello and welcome to the Up North podcast. I'm Kirk Bangstead. Pat Kreitlow is here too, along with Sarah Yakub.
And we are chock full of guests and information this week. We are all over the most important job of 2022, which is democracy protection, whether you live up north or any place else in these United States while they are still united. Let's try to keep the democracy together, shall we? It starts with having Congressman Mark Pocan on to tell us why this Wisconsin congressman is asking the United States Attorney General to investigate the 10 people in Wisconsin who fraudulently tried to pass themselves off as presidential electors as part of that multi-state effort for Donald Trump's gang to incite a coup.
And then we talked to State Senator Jeff Smith, who serves on the Senate Elections Committee, to discuss what Republicans are still doing to amplify the big lie and undermine public confidence in fair elections.
But first, before we go along with our awesome show, with our awesome guests, I wanted to do a personal thank you to anybody listening on the radio tonight or folks that we're going to catch it on the podcast next week. Anybody who donated to the Minocqua Brewing Company Super PAC to be able to allow us to play our anti-gerrymandering commercial in the Wausau Media Market. I just wanted to thank you. We were able to do it. It played, and I think it might have been the highlight of the game for me.
I think it was the highlight for a lot of people. I do.
Was to watch that commercial because it showed it told a lot of people in the Northwoods that they need to be blaming Republicans for rigging maps yet again for the next 10 years.
Well, it was great. It was great to get that out there and to see you and Sarah and Kristen Lyerly and some other folks on the TV still putting your voice out there. I'm sure that actually made more than a few people happy in your respective parts of the state to know that you're still staying active that way. Just in case they didn't already know, they could catch you here every Wednesday evening. And it was probably the highlight of the weekend. Because that game was everything I said last week that I was afraid that it was going to be. So now we get to spend, I don't know how long, saying, is Aaron Rodgers done? Is he going to retire? Is he going to be traded? And there are 7,000 other radio shows you can listen to right now for speculation on that. This will not be one of them.
Exactly. Like, Pat, we can't even start talking about this because every other radio show in the entire state is talking about all this stuff right now too, as well as all the memes that were hilarious about anti-vaxxing and Aaron Rodgers.
Oh yeah. You can only play with the word shot so many times. Oh no, it turns out you're wrong. You can play with it limitless times to do that. And Sarah, you're close enough to the river over there to know that the people in that flat land to the west of you were all very happy to see the Packers go down.
As a Vikings fan, I felt a little dirty being a 49ers fan, but I'm going to go with it.
It's nice of you to throw away all the goodwill that you've built up all this time with that confession.
Sarah, so you just made tons of friends on our radio show today.
One more note of things in the news, because it's new today, Wednesday, as we tape the show. And that is that U.S. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer has announced that he's going to be retiring at the end of this session. And it leads to the other parlor game. If you don't want to play what's happening with Aaron Rodgers, now we get to play all over again. Will Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, go along with Joe Biden's pick, or will they muck it all up? And so we get to play that game for a bit, I sense.
Oh no, we got to worry about Manchin and Sinema for the Supreme Court justice too?
I doubt it, but it's always possible. So hey, when we come back, we'll switch gears. Congressman Mark Pocan on the need to put more investigatory firepower behind the plot to seat fake electors and steal the 2020 presidential election. You're up north.
You lie like a priceless Persian rug.
The way you lie. Way to go, Pat.
We have a theme, lying songs this week.
The way you lie. Pat, so Congressman Pocan, we'll introduce you in a second, but But Pat and I have started making it a competition on who could play the most apropos music leading into our segments. So that was a pretty good one, Pat. I have to say.
Thank you very much. So we're going to get into something we should have that should have received more attention a long time ago, but at least people are finally becoming more aware of the plot to steal a presidential election. It wasn't a fluke, and it wasn't some seat of the pants effort by amateurs like we used to think, Sarah.
And the more we're learning, the more we're seeing reports that the organization of fake Trump electors was coordinated well within the Trump campaign.
So while state officials and even local prosecutors have been asked to look into the matter, our next guest believes it should be high up on the to-do list of one Merrick Garland, Attorney General of the United States. So Congressman Mark Pocan does join us now, and it's nice to have you here, Congressman. Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much for having me. Glad to be here.
So we will get to, let's start right with the liars, the people who fraudulently turned in a certificate saying that Donald Trump had won Wisconsin, which again, when it first happened, people didn't know it was happening in all these other states. And as it's become better known, you showed some leadership on behalf of the Badger State by asking the U.S. Attorney General to get involved. Tell the audience why you think it rises to that level and what your hope and expectation would be for that.
Sure. Well, I think everyone focuses on what happened on January 6th of 2021. Clearly, we saw the visuals. It wasn't a normal tourist day at the Capitol, like some Republicans say. It's nothing that Ron Johnson says. It is, you saw it with your own eyes. It was a violent attempt to try to overthrow the election results. And, everyone focuses on that. But what they forgot is there was also maybe not a violent attempt at a coup, but there was a shady legal work document attempt in 7 states. And now we know that it is coordinated by the Trump campaign, by Rudy Giuliani himself. And we've heard that from electors, these fake electors in states. And I'll be honest, at first, I didn't think much about it, Pat. I was thinking about, what we went through on January 6th, and we all saw those visuals. But fortunately, people in my district kept bringing it up. And finally, I'm like, look, we got to deal with this. And when I saw the action in Milwaukee County, that the county district attorney wasn't going to go after it, I'm like, well, this is a federal issue. We need to go after these electors, because if you don't, they will do this and other things next time. They'll continue to have an insurrection with a legal maneuver rather than the violence that we saw. So it's imperative we do this. We have to make sure people know their vote counts. We can't let 10 people change the votes of 3.3 million people in Wisconsin. And that's why, I still think Josh Collins should look at this as well as our state attorney general, but clearly the federal Department of Justice has to get involved.
So I'm completely with you, Congressman. I'm just like every other Wisconsinite. I didn't even know this happened until it was on Rachel Maddow, probably like 3 or 4 weeks ago. Sure. I was appalled. I'm like, and I immediately called. I run this super PAC. I'm starting to talk to people around Wisconsin. I immediately called some lawyers, and I was like, "What are we doing here, guys? Like, who's doing something?" And apparently, Law Forward are like, we've had a lot of the guys on Law Forward on this podcast. They filed a complaint that same, like the day later, to the Wisconsin Elections Commission and to the DA in Milwaukee County, and that nothing happened with that for an entire year. So that was appalling to me. I mean, it's not appalling that Wisconsin Elections Commission wouldn't do anything, because the commission was created to fail with 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats on the board. So obviously nothing's going to get done in that body. But the fact that nothing's happening still with these electors was crazy to me. So the question I have for you is, I'm very worried that Merrick Garland isn't doing stuff here. Like, as a normal, not really political, I'm political, but I'm not like, I don't know anything any more than any other average citizen does. Like, to me, I need some reassurance from Merrick Garland that not only is he, looking at these fraudulent electors, but I just want to hear a lot more from him, period, about everything going on that went haywire and illegal between January 6th and all the states that are doing stuff. So I'm hoping that you can give us kind of the federal viewpoint of maybe you know something more than we do with Merrick. What's up with Merrick Garland?
Well, hopefully this helps a little bit. The Department of Justice recently said they are investigating, but of course that means they can't talk about it, but they at least acknowledge that, and that's important. But, you know, what I've noticed going from local government, I've served on the county board, to state government, where Pat knows this well, things were a little slower than they were getting things done at the local level, to going to federal, you take this exponential jump of, you know, sloths watch us and go, why is Congress so slow? It's just part of the federal government problem, right? How things operate. So, you know, one, I hope the Attorney General just is more aggressive, period. I agree with that statement. But two, I understand why things go slower. But in this case, we have an election coming up, and people have to have that certainty that their vote will count. Otherwise, you will be doing the work they wanted to anyway by suppressing the vote.
Well, and I mean, living in Wisconsin under Walker and looking at the effect, the things that seem like fringe, ridiculous mishaps that would never be taken seriously elsewhere actually fly here. And what I'm finding is that there's this morale that we're so beaten down and used to the shenanigans, is a word I find myself using often, that it's like, well, it's another day in politics. And so we're really looking for someone to be the North Star and show leadership and say, no, this is wrong. This is illegal. You don't get to fake electors. But I can imagine it's a difficult balancing act from a prosecutorial standpoint, because you don't want to validate these people or empower them like they actually did something powerful. But yeah, Congressman, what can you tell us in terms of the idea that this is just politics, and, you know, cheating to win is part of the game, and politics are dirty, and we should just accept it, that this is just the way life has to be?
Yeah, well, and there are many people in Rudy Giuliani's family who would like you to think just that. But here's the reality on the Wisconsin situation that I think is even more significant. 7 states submitted false, fake, forged, whatever you want to use, electors. 5 of them, including Wisconsin, outright lied. But 2 other states actually put in the language a little wink, wink, like, we know that we may not count, but if we do, count us. Wisconsin didn't. We broke the law in every way possible. Even Michael Gableman could figure this one out with a couple months' time. So, you know, if that could happen, certainly there needs to be some prosecutions to make sure that this doesn't ever happen again. You can't just use shady legal practices to try to do an insurrection. That's no different than what happened on 1/6, and we have to call it out as that and go after the people who broke the law.
Well, and, you know, as a follow-up to that, as an attorney, you know, we have an ethical obligation to not file frivolous anything or to be dishonest. So I'm wondering why more people aren't losing their bar cards over this.
Yeah, I mean, this Department of Justice should, whatever actions they decide to take, that's what they should do, but they do need to do something. And, you know, I think really to Kirk's question has been my normal frustration with Washington. We just, you know, everything in Washington is slower. It's like there's a different gravitational pull of how we operate. And that's frustrating to those of us on the ground here back home going, look, we had people who lied in Wisconsin. Someone has to do something about it.
All right, so Congressman Pocan, I'm as good a Democrat as anybody, and I'm definitely not going to lambast Attorney General Josh Kaul on this program. But I did hear that the Michigan Attorney General said something to the effect that there's not double jeopardy by bringing these fraudulent electors to court in a state prosecutorial, you know, situation and at the federal level. So I've starting to publicly and nicely push Attorney General Kaul to take action on this, because I think, you know, he needs to.
Well, unlike some, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to the legal merits. What I can tell you is Michigan was unique in that one of their false electors has said the Trump campaign came to us and asked us to do this. So their situation might be slightly different. Again, I don't know the legal ramifications of that, but I agree. I think there could be multiple jurisdictions looking at this. But, you know, in Wisconsin, we quietly, secretively broke the law, apparently, the 10 electors, and they're smart enough not to say who told them to do it, and they're doing their best to not be prosecuted. all the more reason I hope someone prosecutes them.
And I think that the waffling of language in Pennsylvania and one of the other states, I think that actually damns the folks in Wisconsin and elsewhere, because you now have this realization from some of the co-conspirators that we might actually get pinched on this, so we're going to couch our language. And I think it just goes to show an awareness of what was going on. And I definitely agree with the sentiment expressed here that while a lot of times the arc bends toward justice, it doesn't bend by itself. It needs,
Right.
It needs action. It needs activity from people, and that the silence of Merrick Garland and John Chisholm in Milwaukee and others, they may be working so hard, but, and this gets me to my next question here, we know if for whatever reason the shoe were on the other foot, man, we'd be hearing about this every day, and we'd be hearing it directly from, Bill Barr or whatever, puppet is in the next Republican White House. And so that's what I want to ask you about, Congressman, is let's get past this November, and let's assume a scenario where Governor Evers loses and the legislature is still in Republican hands and President Biden is dealing with a fully Republican Congress. What's that going to look like? And it's not that we want you to scare our audience, but if your audience right now were Merrick Garland and some of the other folks,
Yeah.
what would you remind them about, the early days of 2023?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, Michael Gableman would actually get a bigger office and maybe a bigger gas card too, right? For that clown car of an investigation he's doing, they absolutely would keep that kind of thing going on, right? They would have all kinds of crackpot cases. They would do more to suppress the vote in Wisconsin to make it even harder for people in 2024 to be heard. And they may actually put a law. Don't forget, a Republican introduced a bill in the legislature to overturn the electors now, a year later in Wisconsin. I mean, this is like not just drinking Kool-Aid, this is swimming in Kool-Aid, right? These guys are doing full dives and not coming up for air. So we've got to do something to make sure that we're protecting the election, especially in a place where we have gerrymandered legislature like we do in Wisconsin. And that means federal prosecutors, state prosecutors, county prosecutors should all be looking at how they can use their roles to make sure this never happens again.
All right, Congressman, I want to pivot. We've got about 4 minutes till the break. I mean, I can't imagine being in your shoes right now. I think I read in maybe Obama's biography that Pelosi was on record saying, Congressman Pelosi said, Bill, the Senate is where bills go to die. And so you guys passed both the voting rights legislative bills. I can't remember exactly what their names are. I've been writing constantly about Sinema and Manchin just letting the Democratic Party down. Man, how are you feeling? How are you feeling about the ability for? I mean, you must be going crazy. I just wanted to get your personal thoughts on what's going on.
Well, thank you for recognizing that I sometimes am crazy. So here's the part that I think everyone should really know. This is all about the problem with this arcane procedure called the filibuster. That was never given to us by our founding fathers. It came decades later because they realized they had no way to stop debate in the Senate. And then over the decades after that, it changed and changed and changed. And don't forget, it was used for all these Jim Crow laws to block people's access to vote in the 50s. This is something that has changed many times. Just this fall, Republicans gave it up so that we could get some things done that we had to do, basic kind of government financing, funding military contractors. And yet now it's sacrosanct. So for anyone, any Democratic senator to give up something as important and core, not to Democratic with a capital D values, but Democratic with a small d values like voting, is not listening to their constituents, and they're not looking at history. So, we do have to make this an absolute priority. 500 laws have been introduced in 49 states to make it harder for people to vote, including Wisconsin. 34 of those laws have passed in 19 states. If we don't do something at the federal level, which means you have to do something about the filibuster, we will have more of these gerrymandered states like Wisconsin pass these laws. And if they don't happen to have a Tony Evers, they'll actually become law.
So, I hate to be the devil's advocate of the segment here, but what do you tell people? There seems to be this tolerance for cheating in politics that we don't see in professional sports even. And so it's it's my team that's cheating, so meh, who cares? And how do we get someone to abandon their party and a lot of times their identity because of identity politics to do the right thing here and fight for this democracy or democratic republic, however you want to describe it?
The difficulty is the Republican Party is no longer an ideological founded political party. They're a cult of an individual, Donald Trump. They all do whatever he says. Don't forget, in the last Republican convention for president, there was no Republican Party platform. They gave it up because it's whatever Donald Trump said. That's what cults do. That's not what political parties do. And if you step out of that, like Kathy Bernier, she winds up not running again. You step out like Jim Steineke, and he's not running again. Donald Trump is a mafia don, and he would make most mafia dons blush in how he operates because he will destroy you in a Republican primary where that crazy voters, that smaller contingent that still believe in Donald Trump are a majority within that caucus. So he threatens people, and that's how he gets away with it.
And Congressman, we appreciate that you're carrying on that fight as best you can. Mark Pocan, thanks again for joining us. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll be back with more after this. You're up north.
Won't you let me die? I was down, you just stood there grinning.
Who knew that Bob Dylan had a song about lying liars as well? So welcome back to the cabin. This is the Up North Podcast. I'm Pat Kreitlow, along with Kirk Bangstead and Sarah Yakub. And lying liars is our theme this week. We talked to Mark Pocan just a minute ago about the fraudulent electors. And now we're going to take it to the legislative level and the folks who, again, continue to tell outright lies about what's happening with the integrity of our elections and the security of their vote. So our next guest is a friend of the show and a friend of mine, and he needs friends after working hours because his days are filled dealing with an unending supply of attacks on voters' rights, election integrity, and basically the truth, Sarah.
State Senator Jeff Smith from the Eau Claire area serves on the Senate Elections Committee. Nice to have you here. Welcome.
I'm so pleased to be here with old friends and able to talk the truth.
I have, that I haven't been inside the Capitol for a long time. You continue to work in there, and when we served together, one of the things that grounded all of us, most of us, was the ability to treat one another with some civility and some personality. And I got to tell you, Jeff, listening to some of the assembly floor debate yesterday, we always knew there was a difference between the Senate and the assembly simply because the one is so much bigger and there's so much more opportunity for colorful personalities to get in there. But Jeff, I got to imagine it is just not as collegial a place, that this isn't just playing up for the cameras. This is a hard place to be these days.
And Pat, I think it's okay in this venue to say that Pat and we made sure that we were visiting places after hours around the square and finding people that we were able to communicate with from the other side of the aisle. You could not get away from it if you went around the square and went to the restaurants and taverns and got into those conversations. And why I've even more recently thought about this, Pat, it's funny you'd bring this up because I realize now how important that really was. There is no respect because you don't have to get to know someone at that level of humanity that we used to be able to do when you and I served together.
Well, I think a big part of that was that we were, again, these were the old district lines. And so there were many more swing districts. And so it was a good thing to show the voters back home that you were willing to work across the aisle, because you never knew if control was going to switch and suddenly you were going to be in the minority party. And if you wanted to get something done, you'd better have a good relationship with the majority party. But ever since the gerrymandering with so many Republicans secure in their seats, there isn't that need. But let me direct it to the elections committee itself, where again, you're plenty busy and we could hit up a lot of issues. But to me, the overarching thing I want to ask you about first is the willingness of the folks running the elections committees and just the caucuses overall in both chambers to bring in an unending line, a clown car, it's been said already, of people who claim to be experts when we've got experts at the state elections commission that they're not working with. Tell folks more about that. What I will go ahead and say is a dog and pony show, but you actually have a front row seat to it.
Yeah, and it all started, almost a year ago with that first hearing where it was a joint hearing from both the Assembly and Senate, and we walked out. We, as Democrats, of course, by the way, when we say we walked out, I was the only one there in person. The rest of my colleagues were virtual, but we demonstrated a walkout saying it's ridiculous. It was a number of lies, and their guests that they invited as speakers, like you just mentioned, Pat, were not experts. They were conspiracy theorists on top of conspiracy theorists, and it's embarrassing to be in a place like that and sitting in a place like that, listening to that over and over. So we have experienced some real craziness going on there.
Well, especially with each one carrying a brand new pillow. That's you don't. Who thought a pillow salesman would have such sway these days, Kirk?
So, Pat, you jumped right into this, and I don't think some of our listeners know exactly what all of this means. We're talking about perpetuating the big lie that Trump won the election, perpetuating the falsehoods that there was that Wisconsin's elections were rigged, and Jeff, you're part of what's this committee what are these hearings all about? Why are we having hearings right now?
So we have committees in both houses. So this is elections committee. In some cases, it's called elections reform committee, but it is the committees where any legislation referring to how elections are run and how they should be handled. But most of the time before all this broke out and craziness, it was basically just to be sure that we were a part of the process and understood the process. But now I don't feel like the majority party wants to understand the process. They just want to hinder the process.
Okay. So, this dog and pony show is happening. That they're bringing in people that have nothing to do with the election system or not experts. How does it make you feel as a senator in Wisconsin to know that your colleagues on the other side are like completely lying or are in the twilight zone or are saying the world is upside down when the world is right side up? I mean, how does it make you feel as a Wisconsinite and as an elected representative of the state?
Well, Kirk, it's even worse than that. As a citizen, as someone who has to leave behind for the next generations a democracy in shambles, it makes me despair sometimes. I'm pretty disgusted, and one of the reasons is because I truly believe that the majority party members who are either silent, so that they're enablers that way, or are actually marching out with the beat of the drum on this stuff and hitting it all the time. My concern is that they know it's wrong, but they think it won't do any harm. It's just going to win elections for them. It's just going to put them in a good place to keep their positions that they have. And that bothers me, that they don't think that this is damaging. This is very, very damaging to our elections and our democracy moving forward.
Senator, what can people do? I mean, we're sitting back, we're watching this. It's, as we're all fighting off the sense of learned helplessness, what advice do you have for people who see it, who understand it, and are just going mad trying to do something about it?
You can't feel helpless, Sarah. That's the thing. We cannot let people feel like they're helpless. There's a meme I just shared on Facebook that said, hey, if your vote didn't count so much, why would they be working so hard to suppress it? Because your vote does matter. Every vote, and we have to keep hammering that point home to everyone. Don't sit it out. It is so, if it hasn't demonstrated now how important your vote is, it never will. This is right down to the courts, right? It is so important that people show up.
Jeff, that's very hopeful, and you are perhaps the most optimistic man that I've ever met. And I say that with only a small truckload of sarcasm, but you have these moments where you are definitely still glass half full on the values that make democracy work, no matter what part of the political spectrum you're from. And to that end, you received some nice national press about a week ago in Washington Monthly, and it was written by somebody who's been studying one of the many species that are going extinct in our world with the climate changing. And in this case, it's the species of the rural Democrat as the political climate is changing. But you are one of those who stands out because you do something that is becoming, again, a rare commodity. You just go find a place to sit around and believe this. He listens. He just goes out and listens to people. Jeff, tell people what you do that is so novel in the year 2022.
I listen. I think you're right. That is now. I know that everyone says they listen, and
you got the pickup truck to prove it.
Yeah, but I honestly tell people, listening is not a natural thing to do. I had to learn to listen, and I'm still learning how to be a better listener. But when you force yourself out there like I do and invite anyone to stop and talk to me at my truck with the big sign that just says, stop and talk to your state senator. Most people who talk are not people of my same political persuasion. You learn right away that it's best to just listen, and you learn a lot. And then you get a chance when an opening occurs to help them listen as well. And it's really been great. And by the way, that article was like a 2-year project that the author set out on and talked to a lot of legislators and had us on Zooms together. It was a great process. I'm just fortunate that he chose me to feature in that article.
So, Jeff, obviously, this podcast is all about trying to bring this news of the state through a progressive lens up north, up to where you represent, up to where I live, up to where Sarah lives. That's why we got 3 hosts from not Madison or Milwaukee here. I rack my brain daily trying to figure out how to change people's minds up north. Pat just said we're losing the rural Democrat. I rack my brains daily on saying, how do I convince these people to believe that Tom Tiffany is lying, that Ron Johnson's lying, that Rob Swearingen's lying about PFAS? How do I convince people that these guys are not in it for the good of Wisconsin? They're in it for power and money. And I need some help. I don't know if I'm doing it the right way. I'm trying, but how do you convince people?
Geez, Kirk, that is a really big, good question. That's a big question. I think everyone finds a different way, and I can't preach and say that you all ought to get a truck and you ought to put a big sign on there and you ought to stand out there as a target, because that's what I become. I become a target. And if you looked at that article, this is an example. The article is ready to go, and I couldn't produce the high resolution pictures that they wanted to use for that article. So I was frustrated about it. They were going to send a photographer even from Washington. I said, no, you can't be sure I'm going to have a good conversation when that photographer is here. So I actually had to dig up somebody who I'd spoken to before. I want it to be legitimate. So that picture, if you see that picture with that article, that is a gentleman who actually stopped to talk to me. And now this would have been the third time now, but the two legitimate times he stopped to talk to me. He's a Republican. He's voted Republican his whole life. And I figured he's the perfect example that I wanted to be sure was in that article, because he has been frustrated by the things that he cares about that aren't getting done. And he wanted to know why they're not getting done. And he understood as we had conversations. Now we've had multiple conversations, and he's gone back to his Republican representatives that he has voted for. And he's come back to me and said, you know what, I'm done voting for them because they're not listening to me like you're listening to me. Mm-hmm. That's the big key. And he now understands that they have the power because they're in the majority, but we have to change that. And he understands that. And I'm hoping more and more people begin to understand that.
Well, and getting people past that talking point. I mean, Robin Vos sure knows how to deploy the talking points that sure sound good and they convince people. But then if you look under the hood, you see that you don't actually have a car engine in there and you don't have a functioning government. But I see reason to hope. Up in the 30th Assembly District, we've been trending blue. We've been solidly purple. And it looks like we're getting an influx of people who know what competent government is. And so where I come from, out in my SoCal days, Republican wasn't synonymous with dumb. It was just a different way of looking at things, but there was an expectation of competent government. Some of my favorite judges and prosecutors are actually Republicans. But it seems to take a different breed of politics out here. So yeah, Senator, I see reason to hope that as we get more people who are going, wait a minute, what happens when I push past that talking point? Are you really serving the people? That will start to see some change.
And I think you just hit on something, sir. I got a quick say is that they're not dumb. And we can't talk to people like they're dumb just because they don't believe maybe what we think are lies. They are lies. Doesn't mean they're dumb.
Right.
They're misled. They're misinformed. They want to believe certain things because it feels like it fits their narrative. We have to be understanding is what we have to be.
Yeah. Well, and it's, I can't think of a better example than you of somebody that I certainly enjoy talking to. And we appreciate you being here to share some of the frustrations of being on the elections committee, but then also some of the signs of hope that are out there, Jeff. Jeff Smith, thank you so much, Senator. Always nice to see you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back to wrap up the show in just a moment. You're up north. They're all fakes up to your mansions. Hey, before we go, we want to thank our hosts at News Talk 92.7, home of the Devil Radio app, where you can listen to the show on demand. On weekends, you can catch us on our website, upnorthpodcast.com, and all the usual places where you subscribe to podcasts. You can also watch us on YouTube by searching Up North Podcast, and you can find the video version on the Facebook page of the Minocqua Brewing Company. And I was foolish enough, Kirk, to read the comments under last week's show earlier today. I wish I would have saved a couple of them, kind of like mean tweets. We're going to read some of those comments in a future show. If you want to email us, info@upnorthpodcast.com, and you can find the work that I do on a daily basis over at upnorthnewswi.com, or search Up North News WI on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
So that's a funny aside because, welcome to my world, Pat.
I mean, you put those up and you respond to a lot of them. And I mean, not the worst of them, but some of them that deserve a response. Like, I can't believe a business is doing politics. And the response is like, have you met us? Or something like that. So I like that you're not afraid to kind of engage a bit, but not, ridiculously so.
It does wear me down, like having to battle trolls like every day. Cause basically my company's like on Facebook. I mean, like that's how we got a lot of followers that people buy beer when I say the beer's at this store. So I know that I got to live on Facebook in order to have my business be successful. But it means you got to go surfing in Costa Rica every now and then, because like it wears you down when you have like tons of Trumpers like just digging,
And they never
digging
get
on you every
tired.
day.
They never get tired. They never run out of, you know, keyboard space.
They never do.
But then we, you know, again, Facebook is not a natural activity for humans, and it is the tool or the platform that we have in this day and age. But like we would tell any of our kids, put it down and go outside now and then. And even in the dead of winter, you know, people are going outside. And Kirk, you were telling me the thing that you've been seeing most, ironically, in your Facebook feed, but is a great outdoor activity in Eagle River.
Yeah, so I like this last segment, and we don't got a ton of time, but there's two things that I want to mention for the hometown folks in Minocqua and Eagle River. One is this ice castle in Eagle River is pretty freaking awesome. It's worth going to. That's our way to get out of the doldrums, is to go to the ice castle. It's just a really beautiful thing that the firefighters put up. And then we got a local hometown here. His name is Kevin Bolger. He is from Minocqua, and he just made the U.S. Olympic team for cross-country skiing.
Awesome.
So a town of like 8,000 people, we got an Olympic athlete in Minocqua, and so I wanted to shout out Kevin Bolger's name.
Yeah.
And then on your way back down, swing through Osceola and hit up Trollhagen. Just recently discovered it through Wisconsin's Learn to Ski and Snowboard Week. So I dusted the dust off of my old ballet muscles and got myself up on a snowboard, and it was wonderful. Their trainers are fantastic. Their bunny slopes are very forgiving, and they've got just a great setup, and I recommend it to anyone.
You know, you're taking me back to my early radio days up in Rice Lake at WAQE. And part of what got us through the winters, a lot of people went to Trollhagen or Christie Mountain or some of these other places. And so my job, this was my first job out of college, was every Friday early afternoon to call to all these ski areas, and they would put on their best thing, like, oh, it's a great weekend to be here, and we've got 12 to 18 inches of packed powder, and we're going to have, you know, this or that and the other thing. And I got to admit, I kind of miss that, you know, hearing just multiple voices from around Northwest Wisconsin saying, hey, here's the place where you want to be this weekend. That said, I never went to any of them. I've never skied a day in my life, but I'm glad for all the other people who do.
Nice. So I'm glad that, you know, it's Up North podcast. We live up north. We try to figure out ways to get out of the doldrums of living in 0 degree weather. And I'm glad we bring it back to happy stuff, because this whole show is not been so happy. So I'm glad you forced that, Pat, by the way.
We do this because we love living here. Yeah. Even in the most extreme weather, one way or the other, this is the place we want to call home. And we just want to make sure to highlight the people and the activities that make it so great. So with that, it's time for us to go. So thank you, Kirk. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks to our guests, Congressman Mark Pocan and State Senator Jeff Smith. And thank you for joining us at the cabin. Come on back up north next week.